And by the way, everyone, we will be recording it because I had at least 10 people, Michael, say to me that they can't make this time slot, but we can't satisfy all the people all the time, so we'll do the best that we can. But Michael, before we get into where the company is at right now, just back up for just a second and just give people a little bit of an overview of the project.
Okay, so the project's been under development, Greg, now for about 5 or 6 years. The mining right was granted in 2021. We've been working on all the other approvals. They're all in place. We've done a substantial amount of preparatory work, so this project is ready to go into production as soon as the final funding arrangements are in place, which we're getting very close to, we feel. It will, once the funding is in place, start production within 6 to 8 weeks because we have all the contractors and equipment arrangements in place. We have the power supply in place. We have the water licenses in place. We have basically everything's been ticked off and checked 3 times. So we're very confident that once the funding's in place, we'll have this project producing within 6 to 8 weeks. We'll then be stockpiling ore for about 5 months until we build, 5 or 6 months till we build to a ore on the pad of about 30,000 tonnes, and then we'll start delivering ore to the plant at Sibanye-Stillwater's plant at Ezawonye. So initially starts up, in development ore, slowly grows and grows over 3 years to peak production, gets to 70,000 ounces a year at an all-in sustaining cost of under $1,000, which we've had updated recently, those costs. And also, at the current gold price, all of our feasibility was done on $1,850 an ounce. So at the moment, it's looking very, very strong.
And by the way, Michael, just to confirm for everyone, those are US dollars, right?
Sorry, they're US dollars. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just
US
for everybody,
dollars, yeah.
just for clarity's sake. So under $1,000 for cost, current spot price around $2,400. So a huge margin in there. Now,
yeah.
Michael, cutting to the chase, I suppose, and what was, really pleasing to see on the company update. I think that we do understand the value proposition here, but it's all about the funding, isn't it?
Yeah, it is all about the funding. And I mean, our goal has been, our primary goal has been to secure as much of this funding as we possibly can by first tier ranking bank style debt, being non-dilutionary and the interest rate being the best you can achieve. So there's a number of other possibilities of funding, and we're certainly fielding proposals on other possibilities, but the bank funding has been the golden prize for us, pardon the pun. And it looks like we're getting good progress on that. The market knows about the IDC, South African Development Finance Institute, that's been there in the wings and has basically completed its due diligence now. What we have managed to do, and we've mentioned in the quarterly, is we've have another major commercial bank now very interested in the project and working towards a term sheet that would be effectively a syndicated loan with the IDC. And that would substantially also increase the amount of debt funding available to a much higher level than was contemplated originally under the expression of interest with the IDC, which is good news because the more we can do it that way, the more we're taking pressure off the equity component that's required for the project, and therefore the dilution to the investors that have been so faithful and so such long-term supporters of the company.
Right, and we're going to get to the debt equity split in a minute. But Michael, just to back up from a timing point of view, we're sitting here circa July 16th right now. Oh my gosh, all halfway through the year. Maybe just take us through what would be a realistic timing of the financing between now and the end of the calendar year.
It's always the question, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's always
on
the
spot,
question,
Michael.
and then you get put in the spot to make predictions, and then you live and die on your predictions.
Absolutely.
Look, we can only go on the objective facts as we see them.
Right.
At the moment, the IDC has basically completed its due diligence and was ready to go to approval. The pause in that approval process was to now look at the joint funding model. So rather than them funding the lion's share of the bank debt and another party coming in for, say, $10 million, they're now looking at a 50-50 split, which will go a lot higher than that sort of theoretical 26 million. So they're looking to make sure the other bank coming in and they are agreed on, if you like, the funding model of how that works, right, and how much, I suppose, to really validate that the project can sustain that much in terms of servicing capacity, given the conservative sort of assumptions they make. And we're very confident it can, particularly with the current gold price. But bear in mind, some of these lending institutions, they use, I think the level used by the IDC in its due diligence is as low as about $1,670. That's the gold price they use to stress test the asset. Right. So You've got to and different institutions use different amounts. So that's the only hold up there. I suppose what I'm saying indirectly, Greg, is that they have, finished their technical due diligence. There's no outstanding issues in relation to it. We're just trying to marry that up now with the other funding institutions' proposal of how it gets funded. So if that goes to plan, the IDC would move into their approval phase very quickly. They have a weekly meeting with their management team to approve it, and then they need to go to their board. Their board sort of credit committee of their board meets on a monthly basis. So depending on the cycle, that could take an extra 6 or 8 weeks, depending on what time, when the management approval happens, then what time, how quickly they can get it then before their board.
Sure.
So it could be a month, it could be 6 to 8 weeks. It just depends on your luck of when you actually get in front of their board. So that's what the pathway they're on. The other bank that we're talking to is fast tracking at the moment. It's already appointing its due diligence technical people to start that they estimate it could take. Look, I don't want to quote numbers, but it's a matter of a few months. That's what they think in terms of getting that through. And once they're technical, because they can fast track that, given the IDC's done a lot of work already, I suppose, and the data room's all set up, and they've had a good look already at the data room. But they needed independent to sign off on that. The banks don't; they outsource effectively that technical part of the due diligence. So they're also appointing lawyers to start the sort of commercial documentation phase of it as well simultaneously. That's a level of confidence we all have that we want to start the legal process as well as the technical due diligence. So we're hoping, that's why we said in the announcement, we think that by the end of the quarter, we should be saying that this stuff's, if we've been successful, it's done, and we're entering binding documents to commence the funding. So,
that's Q3, Michael, you mean?
Yeah, that's that we said the current quarter. Yeah. So that's what we're saying. And that's based on the information we've been given. So please, shareholders and investors, bear in mind, I'm basing what I'm saying based on what other people are telling me. And that's not just on our side of the fence, it's people from the other institutions. But, that's my best, the best ability we have to predict is based on that. But we are still dependent on third parties.
Right, but the IDC at this point, they have completed their technical due diligence on the project itself.
Yes. The pause on their approval process is because, the funding model in terms of how much they're being asked to provide has changed given this joint approach now. I mean, it's actually increasing. So they're looking at, and they're happy to do that, but they want to see what the other bank's funding model says. So they're waiting to get that through. So yeah.
Right. And speaking of the amounts, can you just take us through again the amount of funding required? Maybe not even break it down at this point for debt to equity, but just the total. And also, if you can, for investors, let them understand about the peak funding requirement.
Well, the peak funding requirement, the peak funding requirement's published in the DFS, and that's basically a cash model, Greg, that just says, allowing for the money we're going to be making from producing, development ore along the way. How much money do we need to get it from A to B, and B being completion of construction and funding? That's stated at 54 million US in the DFS. Now, the DFS, there's a couple of things, moving parts here that people, I suppose, need to understand. One is the DFS model is a cash model. It doesn't take into account, therefore, interest charges and the sort of how you get the money. For example, if you got the money from a streaming company, then part of your production gets sold at a lower value per ounce, so that would all impact it all impacts everything. If you're going to a bank, obviously you're going to be charged interest, so that will increase your funding requirement because you've got to pay the interest, you've got to service the interest or capitalize it or do something. So basically, the funding model under the definitive feasibility study was 54 million, but that was done at a gold price of there's things pulling it both ways. That was done at a gold price of 1850. There are some sensitivity tables in the DFS that are published. If you look at, if I look at some of those quickly, and all other parameters change as well, but based on the DFS model, if you had a gold price of 2,200, I don't think our scale and the sensitivity went higher than that. People weren't predicting the gold price to be at 2,400. The peak funding there went to 43, 44 million. So because the ore that we're now producing is selling at a higher price, it's reducing the notional peak funding model that was published under the DFS. But other things go the other way to pull against it. I mean, some of the costs have gone up. We're in an inflationary environment. Everyone knows some of the costs have gone up. So and then we come to the banks, and the banks we're working with, the IDC and the bank we're working with, and we're talking to several banks about working capital facilities and so forth. They will use a far more conservative model than even some of them will than the DFS use. So as I
Sure.
mentioned earlier, one of the financial institutions was using a low end gold price of 1670 or something of that ilk. So you can
Right.
see that's
Sure.
in a prevailing gold price of 2,400. So that will make them say, well, the peak funding requirement from our model is more like 60 million.
Right.
It just moves around depending on who you're talking to, but it's of that ilk. It's of that ilk. I'd say at the moment 50 to 60 million is what the sort of peak funding is.
Oh, got it. And Michael, I want to ask you, you've been at it for a long time now. Uh, as far as your general feeling of the encouragement level of the conversations you're having, this is more qualitative than quantitative. Do
Yep.
you feel that we truly are at the goal line, so to speak, or very close to it?
Yes, I do. And I think that's because I've seen, I mean, obviously the things that would support that conclusion, not just my subjective analysis, is the gold
Right.
price this year has gone up enormously. And I think also what's happening is there's been a softening of that hardline attitude that some had to the jurisdiction. I think that comes up less and less now, the South African jurisdiction, which was always a challenge for some investors and some funds. And I think a good gold price and a good project overcomes all those issues, and that's what's
Right.
starting to happen. I'm getting a lot more people coming back to us and looking people who we'd spoken to before. So yes, I'm a lot more confident that our primary aim, as I've said, is to maximise and proceed with this debt financing package. There are other possibilities as well, though. It's not all the ball. They're not all in one bag. There's a
Yeah.
mixed bag here.
And Michael, speaking of that, and I don't know to the degree you can talk about it, but you've changed up the team a slightly on the financing side, yeah, haven't you?
Yeah, we did. We sort of did a lot of work ourselves last year and into early part of this year, and then I was introduced sort of via the Indaba conference this year to a really good financing executive who we've sort of taken more. It's not so much a mandate externally; he's more become part of our team, on a
Right.
retainer type basis. And he was recommended highly to me by one of my co-directors in South Africa, Hume Scholes, who's been around the mining industry in Africa for decades. And this fellow has been a revelation. He's been fantastic. He's updated our models. He's got us in front of other banks that we weren't in front of. And I think
Right.
he's been a substantial reason for us actually really cracking through those barriers and getting into these banks.
Yeah, and I think that that's another point from our point of view that's changed. We always say to ourselves, what's changed within the
Yeah.
company? And a lot of times it is the people as much as the project, if you will.
Yeah. Well, Andre is an ex-banker. He's based in London, but he's expat South African, so he knows the jurisdiction. He's worked for Standard Bank. He's worked for Society Generale. He's worked for some of the big banks. So he's been around mine financing for 20 years plus on the other side of the fence with the banks. The first thing he did was sort of look at it and change our presentation and put the presentation into a really sort of banker friendly
Right.
manner that actually identified the risks up front for them and answered the risks and put the model in a way they like to see it. So basically what he did was make their jobs easier, which I
Right.
found that's a simple thing to do, but if you don't know how to do it, you can't do it. He basically presented it in a picture that they like to see and a way they like to see, and that got attention from people. Say, oh, I don't have to do a lot of work on this. This guy's already done it for me. That's sort of
Right.
why I think we got a lot of traction with his
Right.
introduction to the team. We meet on a regular twice weekly basis to go over where we're at with all these initiatives, and then he's in constant contact with my COO Rudy DeSell and with the CFO Simon White. They're in constant contact.
Yeah, and again, Michael, it sounds like that's also one of the key reasons that over this past quarter there has been a lot of progress at the company
Yeah,
on the financing side.
I'd like to say it was all me, Greg, but I'm pretty sure it was
It
some
takes a
additions to the
village.
team.
Absolutely. Okay, everybody. I know that people do have questions, and I think that we understand and we can read the quarterly. We will send out afterwards the quarterly. It's in the public domain afterwards. But I think we should open it up right now for Q&A. And if you're shy, you can always WhatsApp me as well. I'm just going to start out. I believe that somebody's put up their hand. Um, or you could take yourself off mute if you would like as well. Hang on. I thought I saw somebody. I know one question right away, Michael, which is that somebody was asking earlier about the percentage of debt versus equity from the overall funding. To the degree you can talk about that, can you discuss it?
Yeah, I think we mentioned in the quarterly, and I'd stick by that we're aiming for 50 to 60% debt, and I think the upper end of that is achievable. So, that would be the sort of ratio that we're, and, then in terms of the equity component, people, I think, also need to not jump to the conclusion that that means the company would go out and do a massive capital raising. There's other options where we could bridge loan with other lenders, that bridging position until we raise the money when the mine's up and going and in a better position to the market to be more friendly for a capital raise. So, that we're looking at all those options. It's not, I think there's a bit of a perception that, once we set that piece, we're just going to go and do a massive capital raise. Well, one, the money's not required immediately. It's only required over 18 months before the bank lending money starts to be drawn down. So, and secondly, there's other opportunities and potential offers we're fielding on filling the gap in a sort of a quasi debt position for that startup phase, and then raising the capital in a more orderly manner over the next 18 months, and then therefore creating the equity that way. So, for example, if we got the mine construction started and we started the stockpile going and things were going really well, obviously you would expect, you can't guarantee, but you expect there would be an uptick in the company's, when it started pouring gold, for example, there'd be an uptick in the company's share price, and that would be a time you'd start looking at repatriating that bridging sort of debt and raising the equity.
Got it. And I see that there's a question, but before that, there's another question here also. Someone's asking me offline, stockpiling versus cash flow. I believe what he's trying to find out is how much and how long would the stockpiling be before you would realize some cash out of that?
Well, we'd love to just start sending the ore as soon as we produce it, and that's it's a very good question, because why wouldn't you just start sending the ore off to the plant as soon as you can? Well, that's because you're going to generate cash flow and start pouring gold. The problem is that the plants are it's a big plant. They're set up for, 2 lines. If we start delivering ore in dribs and drabs, it makes it very hard for the plant, because our ore is a different grade and consistency to some of the other materials. So what we want to do, and what they want us to do, is get to a point where we can consistently deliver a minimum of 15 to 20 and then increasing as we go per month. So we don't want to, ultimately we get to about 60,000 tons a month, but to build a stockpile, it's going to take us about 5-6 months, because at the start of the process, we're on what we call development ore. We're not just working on stopes. We're actually developing the mine and taking ore out as we do it. But it's a slower process in terms of building. Once the mine gets and running at full fettle, it'll be producing 60 to 70,000 tons of ore a month. But in the first startup phase, it's going to take about 5-6 months to get to that 30,000 tons before we start delivering to the plant. Does that answer the question? Oh, it's a bit messy.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. That's a great answer. I'm just going to click on a Q&A button here. I'm just going to read it out in case anyone can't see it here. Michael, is IDC proceeding to approvals on the basis that they may still go at it alone, or they, pardon me here, I don't have my glasses on, or are they now on pause waiting for the other banks to finalize their DDA?
It's the latter, really, because what they were ready to go on their own, but they always required that other 10 million of sort of quasi debt type support, which was really the Wingfield expression of interest we previously sort of discussed. So that, or we could have been, there are a number of other sort of ways we could have raised that money, but at the moment this looks far more attractive. So it's really, in answer to the question, when you say is the IDC, it's really us asking the IDC to look at that, and they've agreed to do that. So it's a better outcome for everyone. So it's a mutually agreeable, I suppose, pause that's necessitated by this new introduction of a new bank.
Got it. Now, Michael, here's another question. I'm getting there. They're definitely getting to the weeds here. Hedging gold price to get better debt financing terms. I believe what the person's asking me is, if you hedge some of your gold, would you actually then be able, does that facilitate a debt funding agreement?
I think that there will be a condition that some amount of hedging will be a condition of, and in fact, we've already had some discussions about that. But I don't want people to get concerned about because hedge books have this sort of reputation as causing problems for companies sometimes. In our case, it is important to do some hedging, because part of our funding model is that we're producing ore as we go, which is helping fund the development of the mine. So the gold price is important, but at the moment, because the spread between the spot price and the actual price we've modeled in our DFS is so great, it won't be hard for us to do that. And we're talking about doing, rather than sort of a full hedging contract, they're talking about what they call put options, where we can buy put options relatively cheaply over a proportion of our production over the first year or so, and that will underpin effectively, say if the gold price is at 2,400, we bought put options at $2,000 or something.
Right.
It's quite cheap to buy them, and that will sort of insulate. So we don't necessarily have to exercise them, but we've got them as a backstop if the
Right.
gold price was to fall. And then we think once we get into sort of past that first year, we think another year of sort of hedging a proportion of the production, it'll probably be somewhere around 20 or 30% would probably be the prudent approach. But that's really to be
Sure.
worked out with the banks, and it's already on the table for discussion. And in fact, the bank that's come in the last month and a half is offering to provide that sort of hedging service as well, both on its behalf and on behalf of the IDC and the company. So that's something we're discussing with them right now.
Yeah, and certainly it's hard to argue when you have the kind of spread right now where, $2,400 spot price, cost of $1,000 to not lock in something. I know that some people just want a pure 100% upside, but from a pure
But I
prudence point
suppose,
of view,
Greg, sorry to interrupt you, but what I'm
yeah,
saying is we're not locking in a traditional hedge where we have to sell a portion of the gold at
yeah,
that price. What we're saying is we'll have a put option,
exactly.
which we could exercise if we got to that point. So we still be trying to sell the gold at whatever the prevailing spot price is. So if you're a gold bull, we're not going to be selling it at $2,000 an ounce. If you're right, and that is the gold bulls out there are right, we'll be selling it at whatever the spot price is.
Got it.
We
Exactly.
won't be using the puts.
Right. Okay, I'm just going to read the questions. Apologies, everyone haven't read them. What gold price would the banks and financial institutions be using typically? The discount range from 10 to 25%. Say that sounds about right.
Well,
Maybe you
some
can,
use a
yeah,
lot less. I mean, I've mentioned some numbers earlier. Others, the new commercial bank we're dealing with is a lot closer to spot. So they're probably more like that 10% type price. But I don't want to quote the numbers, but I just use the example. The IDC was quite conservative in their funders model that
got
they
it.
used. Yeah.
Okay, Michael, next question. How do we move from the 4 million ounce resource to the 12 million ounce resource, which has been mentioned? What are the next steps, or what are the steps?
Okay. The next step is that we're waiting. We're waiting, and I know people are impatient. I'm impatient. We're waiting for the grant of a prospecting right that's adjacent immediately to the west of the Kuala entry port, and just to the south, and that is known as application PR 10730. And if that's granted, it will be granted. It's just going through the final administration stage, which seems to take forever. That will immediately substantially increase our gold resources, and we already know what the number is because we've already had the data looked at, and we've had those areas before under a prospecting right, so we know the data. I can't mention the number here because I can't start talking JORC resources until we've got a JORC resource.
Yeah,
But it will be a substantial increase. In terms of the 12 million that was there on the lease in 2000 when the mine stopped, it's all still there, obviously. A lot of those areas are flooded, so it depends on the gold price and longer term what we do. Technology and advancements will enable us to, the JORC code from 2012 now requires us to have a reasonable economic prospect of extraction, whereas the
sure.
JORC code, when that was published 2001, that last resource, they didn't have that requirement. So we could republish that today if we didn't have the new JORC code, but we have to work through that and show that it's feasible to
Right.
extract it. So the gold's still there physically. In the old JORC code, you didn't need to prove you could actually extract it. There has to be some prospect to do that now. So we will work our way through that. It's not been, I suppose, the immediate priority just to get sort of headline numbers, but we still know
Right.
it's there, and we will be looking to try and improve it. But there's another prospecting area that we've applied for earlier this year, late last year, which will come on hopefully in the next 6 months, and that'll add further extensions to the project as well. So there's 2 further prospecting rights now pending, issue that will automatically increase that resource from the 4.28 million ounces at the moment.
Understood. And Michael, and also just for clarity for everyone, that extension up to 12 million ounces, that is certainly, as far as life of mine, that is certainly not in the current studies that the banks are looking at, is it?
No, it's not. All the banks are looking at is the Kuala Shallows project, which
Right.
is a little bit under 1 million ounces over the 17-year life of mine, 17 to 18
Right.
year life of mine. So none of these stuff's in that. No, this project that we're funding at the moment only uses up at the moment, about 20% of the resource that's there at the moment.
Right. So just to let everyone know that certainly represents upside optionality, and it's also one of the reasons of the embedded value within Wits Mining at the top co level. The next question I'm getting more on funding is, would somebody be interested in, I believe what he's trying to say is somebody interested at all at the project level? I assume he's talking about a strategic partner or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that.
There's a couple of people that have expressed interest in that. Yeah, and so those We're having discussions with people, but they tend to be slower, those sort of discussions. And
Yeah.
if that comes to fruition, it will be because we think it's in the better interest of shareholders. But at the moment, I haven't got any firm proposals in front of me, but there is discussion. So
Right.
yes, more than one party's expressed interest in that.
Right. Um, Another question is very much in the weeds. Any power issues at site?
No, power is good. We've got the full approval for I think it's 7.5 kilowatt, whatever it is that's
Right.
sufficient
Okay.
to power the mine. The substation's been built, the connections there. So the power position will be we're on mains grid, and we also have full diesel backup if there's an issue with load shedding. And we did mention in the quarterly, and I think hopefully some people I think did pick up on it. The Eskom situation, which has been much maligned in the last few years, has substantially improved this year with the new CEO of Eskom and a new minister responsible. They've got it back to they've had 100 days now of no load shedding in the main provinces. So that's going from a situation where they had sort of you had major load shedding going on last year. So that's a really good improvement. I think one of the circuits of their nuclear power plant came back on the other day. Another one's been granted an extension for 20 years. So they're sort of delaying that sort of transition from all of those sort of traditional power bases. So I think at the moment we're also looking longer term at solar and a solar backup situation like everyone is, and they're becoming
Right.
cheaper and better all the time. So I don't have any concerns about the power issue at all.
Got it. Michael, not to take up too much of your time, but here, another question coming in. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the potential with uranium?
Yeah, I know it gets asked a lot. I mean, with uranium, I think we've got an exploration target there of 12 to 16 million pounds. We need to do something about that. It's a value that we've got to unleash and unlock. At the moment, the best plans we have to unlock that is to actually do some more drilling, and we have planned and costed a drilling program at about 1.5 million US to put further holes in that. The goal of that drilling program, which we're highly confident it would, is to convert that into a JORC, at least inferred category resource for the uranium in that area, and also test the extensions so that we can see mineralization on the extensions to get a sort of further exploration target on the balance of it. You know, you're damned if you do it. At the moment we've delayed doing that because we haven't had the money, and to go and raise the money at these prices, we're sort of diluting everyone to do that.
Yeah.
And so we've sort of thought the prudential thing to do is to sit back and hopefully get the gold into production, and then we can do that relatively easily with the cash flows that will be available. The other alternative we've looked at, and we will open our minds to again, is to somehow JV it.
Yes.
And that's something that's still on the cards, but we haven't progressed that at the moment, but it's still there. It's very much in our upper mind, although the gold, starting the gold funding and production there has been the priority for us.
Got it. Michael, another question. This is on ownership. How does the ownership structure work with your partners related to funding of the mine? Do your partners match funding, or is the funding paid back to WWI through the partnership cash flows?
It's the latter. I mean,
Okay.
they paid to get their position originally. There's other people now, some other groups there that are looking at potentially buying part of the BEE position. They will come with some funding if that comes off, but that's too early to talk about. But in terms of this particular BEE partner, no, their commitment was to buy in, replace the historic BEE partner. They provided a lot of assistance and support in the development phase of the permitting phase of the project,
Right.
and that's where they committed. So the rest is going in as loan funds from Wits. So the person's got it the right way. The latter of his description was what's occurring, or her description is that we're accruing a loan account at the moment. I think the accounts show that the current loan account from the South African subsidiaries to the Australian holding company is something of the ilk of 21 million US. So it's
Right.
quite a high amount, and that will increase depending on how we fund the balance of it. So that money, once the banks are repaid, will flow directly into the top co structure before anyone at the
Right.
bottom co starts getting substantial dividends.
Right. And for people that are not necessarily that familiar, when you're dealing out of Australia, that these types of structures are not unusual at all. Um, the
That's right.
the
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of African countries too. I noticed the other day one in Eastern Africa, like the government just gets a free carry position.
Yeah,
the whole project. So,
got it. The next question, what happens with the remaining SBC shares now that the agreement has expired?
well, they've got until under the SBC Global Agreement, there's another 6 to 8 weeks before we have to that position unravels. And if they end up with shares, then they owe the shares back to us. So the option is for us to, buy the shares back through a share buyback, cancelling for the
Right,
what they owe us, or they can sell them on the market and pay us the money. So there's, they've been selling a few, not many. They've still got a few left. It's not a huge amount now. They've been working it down, and they've still got another 6 to 8 weeks to go. So we'll have to address that when we get to dinner. But the facility ended, but there's another 3 month window period in which to unravel the share position,
got it.
which is what the person's asking, I think.
Yeah, definitely, for sure here. A next question about the mine. Does the toll treatment agreement have an expiration date? The reason I'm asking is because it was approved a long time ago.
Yeah, no, it does, but a couple of things on that. One is that the Sibanye executives describe it in their meetings with as what they consider to be an evergreen document, because they want the supply. But in terms of their corporate governance, they can't grant a right over the plant forever. So the way there's some amendments going through at the moment to accommodate some of the banking requirements, but effectively it'll end up being, it doesn't commence until we start delivering ore. So the actual trigger date for the term of so that period of time that's been sitting there to answer that part of the question is not detrimentally affecting us. So it's still current. It doesn't trigger its term until we start delivering ore. So we're not delivering ore. Say we start up tomorrow, we won't be delivering ore for sort of 7, 8, 9 months or whatever it is by the time we build the stockpile. So that's when the agreement will start. The current sort of term of it was, the original term of it was 3 years. And then there's a 90-day termination period. They've agreed to, I think, extend that to 4 years, and the documents are being done now. So effectively, it becomes a 4 or 5 year. And the idea of that is we get out to about 5 years, and we've sort of covered all our banking positions almost by then anyway. So it's not. And then there's plenty of other options of where we could actually treat. But they consider it, I know in the commercial sense, they consider it an evergreen because it underpins the continuation of the plant. When it gets to peak production, we'll be 70,000 tons a month out of a plant capacity of about 150, 160,000 tons a month. So it'll be a big component of their throughput.
Right. And from your point of view, obviously for Westwoods, you want to make sure, excuse me, you want to ensure that you have capacity. So I understand that.
Well, it's also a two-way street, Greg. On one hand, people say, well, would it be better to have it for the life of the mine? And I doubt a big company like that would grant anyone that sort of right over their asset for that period of time. But we want to have flexibility too. There's other options and other people talking to us. There's a new plant being built by another company 20 kilometres from us at Randfontein, a brand new plant that does 800,000 tons a month. It's designed for tailing, but they can also put on hard rock, So we don't want to sort of put all our eggs in one basket.
Right. Great. Hey, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. As I said, it's so much better to have these calls right after an update so you can talk a lot more freely. Everybody, thank you. We know there are quite a number of people on the call today. We appreciate all the interest. Actually, before we go, there is another question popping in right now, so we will get it to you here. Are there any other mining right appeals that WWI is currently aware of that could affect the company?
No, there's a residual couple that are running through from there, but they're not going to stop us mining, and the appeal grounds are doomed to fail. So yeah, I mean, technically there's some application there, but it's not going to stop us, and it's not going to get any success. So no. And by the way, I will say, it's not just me saying that. None of these banks none of them have had a concern with any of that.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Michael, again, thank you so much, everybody. If you have any follow-up questions that you haven't thought about right now, just if you don't know who we are, you could just email greg@igniteequity.com.au or info@igniteequity.com.au. Or Michael, he's obviously very much across all the details of the business, as you can tell. And again, Michael, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Greg.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.